The first shot cracked through the late afternoon air of Redemption Creek's main street, followed by the sound of splintering glass. The second shot answered almost immediately, sending townspeople scattering for cover. Sheriff Daniels had taken refuge behind a water trough, his revolver drawn, but hesitant to return fire with so many civilians caught in the crossfire. Owen Hart dropped the supplies he'd been loading into his wagon and assessed the situation with the quick calculation of a man who'd survived Gettysburg. Two drunk miners, one tall and bearded, the other stocky with a red bandana, were exchanging gunfire from opposite sides of the street, their aim deteriorating with each wild shot. "Damn fools," Owen muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt 45 holstered at his hip. He hadn't drawn it in anger since the war 13 years ago now, but some instincts never fade. That's when he saw her, a woman in a travel-worn dress, her copper hair coming loose from its pins, standing frozen in the middle of the street. One hand clutched a carpet bag, the other rested protectively on her visibly swollen belly. Her face was pale with exhaustion and terror as another bullet whistled through the air. Without hesitation, Owen charged into the street. "Get down!" he shouted, but the woman seemed paralyzed by fear. As he reached her, the bearded miner raised his pistol again, the barrel wavering in their direction. Owen lunged forward, tackling the woman to the ground and shielding her body with his own, as the bullet splintered the hitching post where she'd been standing seconds before. "You're safe now, ma'am," he said, helping her to the relative shelter of the boardwalk, as Sheriff Daniels finally managed to disarm the drunken miners. But as Owen helped her to her feet, he felt her body go slack. She collapsed against him, unconscious, her breathing shallow and her skin clammy with sweat. "I need help here," Owen called out, lifting the pregnant woman into his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the solid swell of her child pressed against his chest. "Doc Wilson. Anybody seen the doc?" Martha Sullivan, who ran the general store, hurried over. "Doc's out at the Peterson place. Their boy broke his leg. Won't be back till morning." She looked at the unconscious woman. "Who is she?" "Don't know," Owen replied, shifting the woman's weight in his arms. "Just got off the stage, looks like." "The Collier Hotel might take her in," Martha suggested, though her tone suggested doubt. Owen had lived in Redemption Creek long enough to understand what remained unspoken. An unconscious pregnant woman with no husband in sight would find few doors open to her. "I'll take her to my ranch," he decided. "Jesse can ride for Doc Wilson after he's done at the Petersons." Martha's eyebrows rose. "That's mighty Christian of you, Owen Hart, but folks will talk." "Let them, Owen said grimly, carrying the woman to his wagon. "Wouldn't be the first time." As he settled her as comfortably as possible among his supplies, he noticed the carpet bag she'd been clutching. He placed it beside her, but as he did, a folded letter fell from a side pocket. Owen picked it up, intending to replace it, when the letterhead caught his eye. "Office of Senator Edward Pierce, Massachusetts." The name hit Owen like a physical blow. Senator Pierce, he hadn't heard that name since Gettysburg. The man who'd saved his life, pulled strings to get him field promoted, and later helped secure the land grant for his ranch. What connection could this woman possibly have to Edward Pierce? Owen glanced at the unconscious woman, noting her quality clothing despite its travel-worn state, her delicate hands that had never known hard labor. A Boston lady, most likely. He fought the urge to read the letter, respecting her privacy despite his curiosity, and tucked it back into her bag. "Hang on, ma'am," he murmured, climbing onto the wagon seat and taking up the reins. "Hart Ranch is just 3 miles out. You'll be safe there." The Hart Ranch sprawled across 500 acres of Colorado territory, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. The main house stood 2 stories tall, built of solid timber and riverstone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. To the north stood the barn and corral, while to the east stretched pasture land where cattle grazed. A small bunkhouse housed the handful of cowboys Owen employed, and beyond that, a kitchen garden lay partially reclaimed by weeds since his wife Sarah's passing 3 years ago. As Owen's wagon approached, Frank Miller emerged from the barn, his pronounced limp a permanent reminder of the shackles he'd worn during 20 years of slavery before the war. Now in his 60s, Frank served as foreman of the Hart Ranch, a position he had earned through hard work and unfailing loyalty to the man who'd cut those shackles off during a midnight raid in Virginia. "Trouble in town," Frank called out, then stopped short when he saw Owen's passenger. "Who's the lady?" "Don't know yet," Owen replied, pulling the wagon to a halt. "Almost got shot in the street. Passed out cold exhaustion, most likely. Help me get her inside. Frank's weathered face revealed nothing as he helped Owen carry the unconscious woman into the house. Jesse's still out checking the north fence line, he said. Should be back before sundown. When he returns, send him to fetch Doc Wilson after he's done at the Petersons. Owen instructed, carrying the woman into the spare bedroom that had once belonged to his wife. Martha, the Mexican cook who'd been with the ranch since Owen returned from the war, hurried in with fresh linens and a basin of water. Dios mío, she murmured, seeing the woman's condition. La pobrecita. She's with child, Owen explained unnecessarily. Looks to be 5, maybe 6 months along. Martha nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. You men out now. I will tend to her. Owen hesitated, still troubled by the letter with Senator Pierce's name. Let me know when she wakes, and Martha, be gentle. I think she's come a long way. Outside the bedroom, Frank gave Owen a questioning look. This going to cause trouble. Owen sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair, now streaked with early gray at the temples. At 38, he carried the weight of too many burdens for a man his age: the war, the loss of his wife, an infant son, the struggle to keep the ranch afloat during drought years. Probably, he admitted. But what was I supposed to do? Leave her in the street? Frank's expression softened. Never known you to turn away someone in need, Captain. Not in Virginia, not at Gettysburg, not now. Owen winced at the title. He hadn't been Captain Hart in 13 years, but Frank still used it occasionally, usually when trying to remind Owen of the man he'd once been. She had a letter, Owen said quietly. From Senator Pierce. Frank's eyebrows rose. Edward Pierce, the man who... The same, Owen confirmed. Don't know what the connection is, but I aim to find out when she wakes. Jesse Hart returned just before sunset, his 12-year-old frame silhouetted against the dying light as he rode in from the north pasture. The boy had his father's build. Owen's brother James had been tall and broad-shouldered, but his mother's thoughtful eyes and serious demeanor. Orphaned at 10 when influenza took both his parents in Wyoming Territory, Jesse had come to live with his Uncle Owen 2 years ago, still grieving and resentful of being uprooted. Uncle Owen, he called, dismounting with the casual grace of a boy raised in the saddle. Fence lines holding, but we've got 3 steers missing from the north section. We'll send some men to look tomorrow, Owen replied, helping the boy unsaddle his horse. Listen, Jesse, I need you to ride for Doc Wilson after he's done at the Petersons. We've got a guest who needs medical attention. Jesse's eyes widened with curiosity. A guest who... A lady who ran into trouble in town, Owen explained, keeping his tone neutral. She's resting now. The boy's sharp eyes missed nothing. Is that why Mrs. Sullivan and Mrs. Thornton were looking at you funny when I passed the general store? They stopped talking real quick when they saw me. Owen sighed. Small towns and their gossip. People will always talk, Jesse. What matters is doing what's right. Yes, sir, Jesse replied automatically, though his expression remained dubious. I'll saddle up again after supper and ride for the doc. As they walked toward the house, Owen placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. There's something else you should know. The lady is expecting a child. Jesse frowned. Where's her husband? I don't know that she has one, Owen admitted. The boy stopped walking, his young face suddenly hard. Is she one of those fallen women Reverend Taylor talks about in church? Owen's jaw tightened. She's a woman who needs help, Jesse. That's all you or I need to know right now. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Isn't that what the good book says? Yes, sir, Jesse replied, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. Inside the house, Martha had prepared a simple supper of beef stew and cornbread. As they sat down to eat, she informed Owen that their guest remained unconscious, though her breathing had steadied. She is exhausted, Senor Hart, Martha explained. Her hands have blisters, she has traveled far, and she is too thin for a woman carrying a child. Owen nodded grimly. He'd seen her pallor, noted the dark circles beneath her eyes. Whatever had brought this woman to Redemption Creek, it hadn't been an easy journey. After supper, Jesse saddled his horse again and rode toward the Peterson farm to wait for Doc Wilson. Owen retired to the porch with his pipe, watching darkness settle over the valley while his mind churned with questions. The letter from Senator Pierce troubled him deeply. What connection could this woman possibly have to the powerful Massachusetts politician? The war had left Owen with many debts, some of blood, some of honor. His debt to Senator Pierce fell into both categories. If this woman was connected to Pierce, Owen's duty was clear, regardless of what the good people of Redemption Creek might think. His thoughts were interrupted by Martha's urgent call from inside the house. "Senor Hart, she is awake." Owen knocked the tobacco from his pipe and hurried inside. In the spare bedroom, the woman sat propped against pillows, her copper hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice carrying the refined accent of Boston's upper classes. "Who are you, Quam?" "You're at the Hart Ranch, ma'am," Owen replied, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "I'm Owen Hart. You collapsed in town after nearly getting caught in crossfire between two drunk miners." The woman's hand moved protectively to her swollen belly, and relief flickered briefly across her face when she felt the child within move. "My bag. It's right here," Owen assured her, indicating the carpet bag Martha had placed beside the bed. "Nothing's been disturbed." She visibly relaxed, though wariness remained in her eyes. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Hart. I'm afraid I've imposed upon your hospitality, but I can leave in the morning." "That won't be necessary," Owen interrupted. "Doc Wilson is coming to check on you, and you're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered." He hesitated, then added, "I believe we may have a mutual acquaintance, Miss Montgomery," she supplied after a moment's hesitation. "Olivia Montgomery." "Miss Montgomery," Owen acknowledged, "when I was placing your bag beside you, a letter fell out. I didn't read it, but I couldn't help noticing it came from Senator Edward Pierce's office." Her face paled further, and her fingers clutched the bedsheet. "You know Senator Pierce? We served together briefly during the war," Owen replied, the partial truth coming easily. "No need to explain the full complexity of their relationship. May I ask your connection to him?" Olivia Montgomery's expression hardened, something like anger flashing in her eyes. "His son Jonathan Pierce is the father of my child," she stated bluntly, though he conveniently disappeared when I informed him of my condition. Owen managed to hide his shock, though the revelation struck him like a physical blow. Jonathan Pierce, he remembered the young lieutenant who'd served under him briefly before Gettysburg, a privileged youth with more ambition than experience, the senator's only son and heir to political aspirations. "I see," Owen said carefully. "And does Senator Pierce know where you are?" "No," Olivia replied firmly, "and I would prefer he remains ignorant of my whereabouts. I came west to start anew, Mr. Hart. I had arranged employment at the Collier Hotel through a distant cousin, but upon arrival discovered the position had been given to someone else." Her bitter tone suggested the real reason: her visible pregnancy and lack of wedding ring. "You're welcome to rest here until you decide on your next steps," Owen offered. "We could use help with cooking and housekeeping if you're inclined to earn your keep. The ranch hands live in the bunkhouse, so your reputation would remain intact." Olivia's green eyes studied him suspiciously. "Why would you offer employment to a woman in my condition? Mr. Hart most would show me the door." Owen considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated, a mixture of duty to Senator Pierce, memories of his own wife's difficult pregnancy, and something deeper he wasn't ready to examine. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be judged by others," he replied finally. "This town is called Redemption Creek for a reason, Miss Montgomery. Everyone deserves a second chance." Before Olivia could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside, followed by voices, Jesse returning with Doc Wilson. Owen moved toward the door. "That'll be the doctor. We can discuss arrangements tomorrow after you've been properly examined." As he left the room, Owen felt the weight of Olivia Montgomery's gaze following him. He had offered sanctuary to the woman carrying Jonathan Pierce's child, a decision that would surely have consequences. But something in her dignified bearing, despite her circumstances, had stirred memories of another time, another place when Edward Pierce had extended a hand to a wounded officer with blood on his conscience. Some debts could never be fully repaid. Colonel William Blackwood arrived at the Hart Ranch shortly after sunrise the next morning, his black stallion's coat gleaming in the early light. At 50, Blackwood cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair and beard showing distinguished streaks of silver, his Union Army colonel's bearing evident in his straight posture and commanding presence. Since moving to Redemption Creek 2 years ago, he had quickly established himself as the wealthiest man in the territory, with interests in silver mining, cattle, and the railroad that was gradually pushing west. Owen was checking fence posts near the main gate when Blackwood rode up. The two men acknowledged each other with the cautious respect of former enemies who now occupied the same territory in an uneasy peace. Hart Blackwood greeted him with a curt nod. Colonel, Owen replied deliberately using the military title. What brings you out this way? Heard there was some excitement in town yesterday, Blackwood said, dismounting smoothly. A lady in distress taken in by the gallant Captain Hart. His tone carried just enough mockery to raise Owen's hackles. News travels fast, Owen observed neutrally. Small towns, Blackwood agreed with a thin smile. I also heard the lady in question is in a delicate condition. No husband in sight. Owen's expression hardened. Is there a purpose to your visit, Colonel, or did you ride all this way to gossip? Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just being neighborly, Hart. Thought I'd offer my assistance. A pregnant woman is a significant responsibility, especially for a bachelor rancher barely keeping his operation afloat. The pointed reference to the ranch's financial struggles wasn't lost on Owen. The drought 2 years ago had hit him hard, forcing him to take out a loan from the Territorial Bank. A loan he suspected Blackwood had influence over. We managed just fine, Owen replied evenly. Blackwood nodded, his eyes scanning the ranch with the calculating gaze of a man assessing property. My offer to buy your land still stands, Hart. $5,000 more than fair given your circumstances. Not interested, Owen stated flatly. The Hart Ranch wasn't just land and cattle to him. It was the future he'd promised his brother he'd secure for Jesse, the legacy he'd dreamed of building with Sarah before she died, the only place that had felt like home since the war. Pity, Blackwood said, remounting his stallion. Well, should you change your mind, or should your new house guest prove too burdensome, my door is always open. He gathered the reins, then paused. One more thing, Hart. I've invited Senator Edward Pierce to visit Redemption Creek next month. I'm considering supporting his congressional campaign, and he's interested in my railroad investments. The casual mention of Pierce's name was clearly meant to gauge Owen's reaction. Owen kept his expression carefully neutral, though his mind raced with implications. If Pierce came to Redemption Creek, he would inevitably discover Olivia Montgomery and her unborn child, his grandchild. Senator Pierce is always welcome in Redemption Creek, Owen replied calmly, though I doubt he'd remember a junior officer from 13 years ago. Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. You'd be surprised what men like Edward Pierce remember, Hart, especially debts owed and favors granted. With that parting shot, Blackwood turned his horse and rode away, leaving Owen with a distinct impression that the colonel knew far more than he should about Owen's history with Senator Pierce. When Owen returned to the house, he found Olivia Montgomery seated at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She wore one of Sarah's old dresses, hastily altered by Martha to accommodate her pregnancy. The morning light softened her features, revealing a natural beauty beneath the exhaustion of her journey. Mr. Hart, she acknowledged him with a slight nod. Your cook informed me you have generously offered me employment. I wanted to thank you and accept at least until I can make other arrangements. Owen hung his hat on the peg by the door. Doc Wilson give you a clean bill of health. He said I'm undernourished and exhausted, but the baby is strong. Olivia replied, a hint of pride entering her voice. He recommended rest for a few days before I undertake any significant duties. Of course, Owen agreed, pouring himself coffee from the pot on the stove. Martha could use help with cooking and cleaning once you're recovered. Jesse could benefit from some schooling as well. I understand you were a teacher in Boston. Surprise flickered across Olivia's face. How did you know that? Small towns? Owen echoed Blackwood's earlier words. The stage driver mentioned you'd asked about the schoolhouse when you arrived. Olivia's expression turned guarded again. Yes, I taught at a private academy for young ladies, a position I lost when my condition became apparent. Owen nodded, understanding the unspoken details. An unmarried pregnant teacher would have been immediately dismissed, her reputation ruined. Jesse's education has been somewhat neglected, he said, changing the subject. I do my best, but running the ranch takes most of my time. He's bright but stubborn, reminds me of his father. Your son, Olivia asked. My nephew, Owen corrected. His parents, my brother James and his wife, died of influenza in Wyoming Territory 2 years ago. Jesse came to live with me afterward. He didn't mention his own loss, Sarah and their infant son, but something in his tone must have conveyed the deeper grief, for Olivia's expression softened. I'm sorry, she said simply. It must be difficult raising a boy alone. Owen shrugged. We manage. He hesitated, then added, There's something you should know, Miss Montgomery. Colonel William Blackwood, a prominent citizen here, visited this morning. He mentioned that Senator Pierce plans to visit Redemption Creek next month. The color drained from Olivia's face. Edward Pierce here. Apparently Blackwood is considering backing his congressional campaign, Owen explained. I thought you should be prepared. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. I should leave before he arrives. I won't have him trying to manage my situation. Has he threatened you? Owen asked sharply. Not directly, Olivia replied, her voice bitter. But when Jonathan informed his father of my condition, the senator arranged for a substantial payment if I would disappear discreetly. When I refused to be bought off, he implied he could make life very difficult for me and my child. Her chin lifted defiantly. I will not have my baby raised as some shameful secret, Mr. Hart, nor will I be pressured into giving up my child to preserve the Pierce family reputation. Owen studied her with newfound respect. It took courage to stand against a man of Edward Pierce's influence, especially as an unmarried woman with few resources. You're safe here for now, he assured her, and perhaps by the time the senator arrives, we can find a more permanent solution. What Owen didn't say was that Senator Pierce's arrival would force a reckoning with his own past, a past he'd spent 13 years trying to outrun. The debt he owed Pierce might soon come due, and when it did, Owen would have to choose between honoring that debt and protecting the woman who now looked at him with cautious hope. Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the first storm of autumn. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that it heralded more than just rain. A tempest was coming to Redemption Creek, one that would test the bonds of loyalty, honor, and promises made in the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg. The storm that had threatened on the horizon broke over Redemption Creek that night, battering the Hart Ranch with driving rain and wind that howled through the valley like lost souls. Owen sat at his desk in the study, a single lamp casting long shadows as he reviewed the ranch's financial ledgers. The numbers told a grim story. Another 2 months of drought had reduced the herd, and the banknote would come due after winter. Unless cattle prices rose significantly, the ranch would be in serious trouble by spring. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his calculations. Olivia Montgomery stood in the doorway, her copper hair braided for sleep, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders over Sarah's nightgown. 3 days of rest had brought color back to her cheeks, though shadows still lingered beneath her eyes. I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Hart, she said, her Boston accent contrasting sharply with the howling Colorado wind. But I heard Jesse crying out in his sleep. Owen set down his pencil with a sigh. The storms sometimes bring back memories of the night his parents died. There was a blizzard in Wyoming when influenza took them. He rose from his chair. I'll go to him. I already did, Olivia replied. He was half asleep, but I sat with him until he settled. I hope I didn't overstep. No, Owen assured her, surprised and touched by her initiative. Thank you. Olivia hesitated, her gaze falling on the open ledgers. Is everything all right? You look troubled. Owen considered deflecting her question, but found himself answering honestly. The ranch is facing some financial challenges. Nothing for you to worry about. She stepped further into the room, her eyes scanning the columns of figures. I was engaged to a banker's son, Mr. Hart. I know what financial trouble looks like. Her finger traced down a column of numbers. Your cattle prices are projected too optimistically for the coming season. Owen's eyebrows rose. You understand ranch accounting. A small smile touched her lips. Numbers are numbers, whether they represent bank deposits or cattle. And I managed the accounts for my father's household after my mother died. She looked up at him. Have you considered diversifying? This much land could support more than just cattle? Such as horses, she suggested. Army remounts, perhaps. With tensions rising on the frontier again, the cavalry will need good stock. Owen leaned back in his chair, regarding her with newfound respect. That's not a bad idea, though it would require capital we don't have at the moment. Thunder crashed outside, rattling the windows. Olivia wrapped her shawl tighter around herself, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby shifted within. You should get some rest, Owen said gently. Doctor's orders. Olivia nodded, turning to leave, then paused. Mr. Hart, may I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really take me in? The truth, please. Owen's gaze held hers steadily, partly because it was the right thing to do, partly because I know what it's like to be judged by others without mercy. He hesitated, then added, and partly because I owe Senator Pierce a debt I can never fully repay. Her eyes widened slightly. What kind of debt? The kind written in blood, Owen replied softly. At Gettysburg. Before she could question him further, a commotion erupted outside, the sound of horses approaching at speed, despite the storm, followed by urgent shouts. Owen was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle kept by the door. Stay here, he instructed Olivia, moving swiftly toward the front of the house. On the porch, Frank already stood with a shotgun, peering into the rain-lashed darkness. Riders coming in fast, Captain, he reported. At least 3. Owen positioned himself beside Frank's rifle at the ready. Wake the hands in the bunkhouse. Quietly. But as the riders emerged from the storm, Owen relaxed slightly. He recognized the lead horse, a distinctive Appaloosa belonging to Thomas Jenkins, one of the neighboring ranchers. The 3 men reined in before the porch water streaming from their slickers. Hart, Jenkins called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. Thank God you're home. They've taken my boy. Who's taken him? Owen demanded, lowering his rifle. Blackwood's men, Jenkins spat. Claim Robbie stole from their mining camp. Dragged him off in chains not an hour ago. Owen's jaw tightened. Robert Jenkins was barely 17, a good kid who sometimes helped with branding at the Hart Ranch. Where did they take him? The old Miller mine, replied one of the other riders, a weather-beaten cowhand named Carter. Blackwood's got it guarded like a fortress. This ain't the first time, added the third rider, Peterson, whose son the doctor had treated for a broken leg. 3 homesteaders east of the creek have been run off their land this month. Blackwood's pushing boundaries everywhere, testing who'll stand against him. Owen exchanged a glance with Frank, whose expression had darkened at the mention of chains. Both men knew what those words meant to the former slave. Let me get my gear, Owen decided. Frank saddle Thunderer and alert the men. We're riding to the Miller mine. The old Miller silver mine lay 4 miles north of Redemption Creek, abandoned years ago, when the main vein played out, then recently acquired by Blackwood's Mining Company. As Owen and the others approached through the dying storm, they could see lanterns illuminating the refurbished main building. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, far more security than a defunct mine should require. 8 guards that I can see, murmured Jenkins, all armed. Owen nodded, studying the layout. The main building where they likely held Robbie stood at the center of the compound with several smaller structures scattered around it. A creek ran along the eastern edge, swollen with rain. This isn't just about your boy Jenkins, Owen observed. Blackwood's got something valuable here he doesn't want discovered. I don't care about his secrets, Jenkins replied grimly. I just want my son back. And we'll get him, Owen assured him. But let's be smart about this. I served with Blackwood at Gettysburg. He was a ruthless tactician then, and I doubt he's changed. Owen outlined a simple plan. Jenkins and Peterson would create a diversion at the south end of the compound. Frank, with his experience in stealth operations during the war, would locate Robbie. Owen and Carter would confront Blackwood, directly assuming the colonel was present. As they prepared to move out, Frank placed a hand on Owen's arm. Captain, this feels like Virginia all over again, he said quietly, referring to the night raid where Owen had freed him and 20 other slaves from a plantation. Let's hope it goes better than that mission, Owen replied grimly. The Virginia raid had succeeded, but at terrible cost. Half the men in Owen's unit had died that night. The diversion worked perfectly. As shouts and gunfire erupted at the south end of the compound, Owen and Carter made their way to the main building. Inside, they found Colonel Blackwood seated behind a desk, appearing unsurprised by their entrance. Captain Hart, he greeted Owen calmly, as if they'd arrived for a scheduled meeting rather than an armed confrontation. I've been expecting you. Where's the Jenkins boy? Owen demanded, his rifle aimed steadily at Blackwood's chest. The thief, Blackwood's tone was dismissive. In the storeroom, cooling his heels. The little serpent was caught stealing documents from my office. He's 17, Owen countered. Whatever he's done, he should be handled by the proper authorities, not dragged off in chains by your private army. Blackwood's eyes hardened. There is no proper authority out here, Hart. We make our own justice in the territories. Not anymore, Owen replied. Sheriff Daniels represents the law in Redemption Creek. A cold smile spread across Blackwood's face. Ah, yes, Sheriff Daniels, the man who couldn't stop two drunk miners from shooting up Main Street. Very reassuring. He leaned forward. The world is changing, Hart. Men like us men who have seen war know that power is the only law that matters. We're nothing alike, Colonel, Owen stated flatly. No. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. We both served. We both killed. We both carry the scars of Gettysburg. The difference is that I've embraced what the war taught me while you hide from it on that failing ranch of yours, pretending to be a man of peace. Before Owen could respond, a commotion outside indicated Frank had succeeded in locating Robbie. Blackwood sighed, rising from his desk with deliberate casualness. Take the boy, he said magnanimously. Consider this a professional courtesy from one officer to another. But understand something, Hart, this territory is changing. The railroad is coming, bringing progress that won't be stopped by outdated notions of honor or small-time ranchers clinging to land they can't properly develop. Is that a threat? Owen asked quietly. A reality, Blackwood replied. One you'd be wise to accept. My offer for your ranch stands, for now, but land values change quickly when routes are finalized. The implications were clear. Blackwood wanted the Hart Ranch for something specific, something connected to the railroad. Owen filed the information away, maintaining his steady aim on Blackwood's chest. We'll be leaving now, he stated. The boy comes with us unharmed. Blackwood spread his hands in mock surrender. By all means, but remember this night, Captain Hart. You've chosen sides in a battle you don't fully understand. Dawn was breaking as the weary group returned to the Hart Ranch. Robbie Jenkins, shaken but largely unharmed, had been returned to his grateful father. The boy's story was troubling. He'd been delivering supplies to the mine when he'd overheard Blackwood discussing removing obstacles along a proposed rail line. Curious, he'd snuck into Blackwood's office and glimpsed maps marking several properties, including the Hart Ranch, before being caught. As Owen unsaddled Thunderer, his mind raced with implications. The most logical route for a rail line through the valley would indeed cross his land that had been in his family since his father acquired it through a government grant after the Mexican War. Land that Senator Pierce had helped Owen retain after his father's death, pulling strings in Washington to expedite the transfer of title. Frank approached his limp, more pronounced after the night's exertions. Captain, that boy's story, it fits with rumors I've been hearing in town. Blackwood's buying up water rights all through the valley. Owen nodded grimly. A railroad needs water for the steam engines. He's securing the route. He paused, a new thought occurring. Frank, when did Blackwood first make his offer for the ranch? 2 months after he arrived, Frank recalled. Right after that, surveyor spent a week taking measurements along the creek. The pieces were falling into place. Blackwood's interest in the Hart Ranch had nothing to do with cattle or even the land itself. It was about the water rights. And now, with Senator Pierce coming to Redemption Creek, the pressure would only increase. As they walked toward the house, Owen spotted Olivia on the porch, her face tight with worry. She had clearly waited up all night, wrapped in a shawl against the pre-dawn chill. You're hurt, she said, immediately noticing the blood on Owen's sleeve where a bullet had grazed him during their retreat. It's nothing, he dismissed, though in truth, the wound stung fiercely. Olivia's eyes moved from Owen to Frank, taking in their mud-splattered, exhausted state. What happened? Blackwood's men took Jenkins' boy, Frank explained. We got him back. Her gaze returned to Owen's face, searching. There's more to it than that. Inside, Owen replied quietly. This concerns you too. In the kitchen, while Olivia cleaned and bandaged Owen's arm, he explained what they'd learned, Blackwood's plans for the railroad, his determination to acquire the Hart Ranch, and the imminent arrival of Senator Pierce. The timing isn't coincidental, Owen concluded. Blackwood must know about my history with Pierce just as he knows about your connection to the Pierce family. Olivia's hands stilled on the bandage. You think he's using me as leverage against you or against Senator Pierce? Both potentially, Owen admitted. Blackwood is a strategist. He places his pieces carefully before making his move. But why, Olivia pressed. What does he gain from involving me in this land dispute? Owen hesitated, then decided Olivia deserved the full truth. During the war at Gettysburg, I served under Colonel Blackwood briefly. He ordered his men to fire on civilians trying to flee the battle women and children. I intervened, and in the confrontation that followed, I shot and killed his younger brother, Lieutenant James Blackwood. Olivia's eyes widened. Self-defense. The military inquiry ruled it as such, Owen replied, largely due to Senator Pierce's influence. He served on the review board and ensured the incident was buried. Afterward, he helped me secure this land and start over. And Blackwood never forgave either of you, Olivia concluded softly. No, he was forced to resign his commission in disgrace, disappeared for years before resurfacing here with a fortune of mysterious origin. Owen's expression darkened. This isn't just about land or railroads for him, Olivia. This is about revenge. Olivia sat back, absorbing this information. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly, where her child Pierce's grandchild grew. So I'm a pawn in this game between you, Blackwood, and Senator Pierce. Only if we allow it, Owen replied firmly. I brought you into this situation. I'll find a way to protect you. Their eyes met across the table, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Both had been marked by loss, by the judgment of others, by circumstances beyond their control. Now fate had entwined their paths in ways neither could have anticipated. The moment was broken by Jesse's entrance. The boy had clearly just woken, his hair tousled, his eyes widening at the sight of his uncle's bandaged arm. What happened? He demanded. Did someone shoot you? Just a scratch, Owen assured him, forcing a smile. Nothing to worry about. Jesse's gaze shifted to Olivia, noting her proximity to his uncle, the intimacy of her tending his wound. Something hardened in the boy's expression. Is it because of her? He asked bluntly. Mrs. Sullivan says trouble follows women like her. Jesse, Owen's voice cracked like a whip. Apologize to Miss Montgomery immediately. The boy's chin jutted stubbornly. Why should I? It's true. Ever since she came, everything's different. Now you're getting shot at and that's enough, Owen interrupted, rising from his chair. Go to your room. We'll discuss this later. Jesse stormed out, his footsteps pounding up the stairs. Owen ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion and frustration evident in his posture. I'm sorry, he said to Olivia. He's still processing his parents' death. Change is difficult for him. I understand, Olivia replied quietly. My presence has complicated things for everyone here. She looked down at her hands, still spotted with Owen's blood from bandaging him. Perhaps it would be better if I found somewhere else to go before Senator Pierce arrives. And go where? Owen challenged gently. Blackwood knows about you now. If you leave the ranch, you will be vulnerable. At least here we can protect you. The we wasn't lost on Olivia. She looked up, meeting Owen's steady gaze, finding something there that made her breath catch, a promise unspoken but real. Rest, she advised, changing the subject. You've been up all night. I'll speak with Jesse. He might listen to a teacher's perspective. Owen nodded gratefully, the adrenaline of the night's events finally giving way to bone-deep weariness. As he headed toward his bedroom, he paused at the foot of the stairs. Olivia, he said quietly, using her given name for the first time. Thank you. She smiled, a small but genuine expression that transformed her face, revealing the woman she might have been under different circumstances, confident, warm, unafraid. You're welcome, Owen, she replied, his own name equally meaningful on her lips. Now get some sleep. There will be battles enough tomorrow. 3 weeks passed in relative peace. Olivia gradually assumed duties around the ranch house, cooking alongside Martha, and bringing order to rooms that had suffered from a lack of feminine attention since Sarah's death. Her pregnancy advanced, her belly growing more pronounced, but her energy remained steady as her health improved under Martha's watchful care. Jesse remained standoffish initially, but Olivia's patient approach gradually wore down his resistance. She discovered his passion for drawing and encouraged it, providing him with a journal and pencils from her own belongings. When she began teaching him algebra and history in the evenings, he revealed a quick mind beneath his defensive exterior. Owen watched this transformation with mixed emotions. Olivia had brought life back to spaces that had felt empty for years, filling the house with small touches, wildflowers on the table, curtains rehung, and mended books rearranged on shelves. Jesse smiled more often, even laughed occasionally. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully when she brought food to the bunkhouse, their initial wariness replaced by genuine appreciation for her cooking and quiet dignity. But Owen couldn't ignore the approaching reckoning. Senator Pierce would arrive within days, according to the latest telegraph from Blackwood. And rumors from town suggested Blackwood was consolidating his position, buying out smaller ranchers, and hiring more men, some with questionable backgrounds and gun handling skills, that suggested purposes beyond mere mining or ranching work. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Owen was inspecting the northern fence line with two hands when Frank rode up at a gallop, his expression grim. "Blackwood's men are at the house," he reported breathlessly. "6 of them armed. They're demanding to speak with Miss Montgomery." Owen's blood ran cold. "Olivia and Jesse." "Inside with Martha. I told them to bar the doors before I rode for you." They spurred their horses to a gallop, covering the 2 miles back to the ranch house in record time. As they approached, Owen saw the riders Frank had mentioned, 6 men on horseback, positioned in a loose semicircle before the house. He recognized Blackwood's foreman, a scar-faced former cavalry sergeant named Hodge, at their center. "What's the meaning of this, Hodge?" Owen demanded, reining in before them, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "Just delivering a message, Hart," Hodge replied with false pleasantness. "Colonel Blackwood requests Miss Montgomery's presence at a dinner he's hosting tomorrow evening for Senator Pierce, who arrived on this morning's stage." Owen kept his expression neutral, despite his surprise. Pierce had arrived early without warning. "Miss Montgomery isn't receiving social calls at present." Hodge's smile turned cold. "It wasn't a request, Hart. The senator is most eager to reunite with his son's friend." The pause before the last word carried clear implication. "If Senator Pierce wishes to speak with Miss Montgomery, he can call here like a gentleman," Owen replied evenly. "Colonel Blackwood suggested you might be uncooperative," Hodge drawled. "He asked me to deliver this as additional incentive." He extended an envelope. Owen took it without breaking eye contact with Hodge. Inside was a bank draft, the exact amount of Owen's loan from the Territorial Bank, due in 4 months. "Blackwood has purchased your note from the bank," Hodge explained unnecessarily. "He's willing to forgive the debt entirely in exchange for Miss Montgomery's attendance tomorrow evening." "Generous, wouldn't you say?" Owen's jaw tightened. The meaning was clear. Blackwood now held power over both the ranch and Olivia's future. If Owen refused to deliver Olivia to the dinner, Blackwood could call in the loan, immediately forcing foreclosure on the ranch. If he complied, he would be handing Olivia over to whatever scheme Blackwood and Pierce had concocted. "I'll discuss it with Miss Montgomery," Owen said finally. "She makes her own decisions." Hodge nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Dinner is at 7. The lady should dress appropriately." His gaze swept over the modest ranch house with undisguised contempt. Colonel Blackwood maintained certain standards. As the riders departed, Owen remained motionless, the bank draft clutched in his hand. Frank moved his horse alongside. "What now, Captain?" he asked quietly. Owen tucked the draft into his pocket. "Now we prepare for war, Frank, one way or another." Inside the house, Owen found Olivia in the parlor, her face pale but composed. She had clearly overheard enough of the conversation to understand its implications. "You can't seriously be considering this," she said without preamble. "It's not my decision to make," Owen replied, handing her the bank draft. "But you should understand what's at stake." Olivia glanced at the draft, then back at Owen. "Your ranch for my compliance." Her voice was bitter. "They're using your financial vulnerability against you." "Against us," Owen corrected quietly. "This is our home now, Olivia. Yours too, if you want it." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate crisis. Olivia's eyes searched his, finding confirmation of what had been building between them over the past weeks, a connection neither had anticipated, but both now acknowledged. "I won't be manipulated," she said finally. "Not by Jonathan, not by his father, and certainly not by Colonel Blackwood. If I attend this dinner, it will be on my terms to confront them directly." Owen nodded, respecting her decision, even as concern gnawed at him. It could be dangerous. Blackwood has something planned beyond a simple reunion. "Of course he does," Olivia agreed. "But I refuse to hide while he threatens everything you've built here." Her hand moved protectively over her swollen belly. "Everything we might build together." The acknowledgement of their growing feelings was both unexpected and inevitable. Owen moved closer, taking her hand in his. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he promised, "you won't face it alone." As their fingers intertwined, Jesse appeared in the doorway, his young face solemn as he observed their clasped hands. But instead of the resentment Owen had feared, the boy's expression held something like cautious approval. "Are we going to fight?" Jesse asked simply. Owen exchanged a glance with Olivia before answering. "If necessary." Jesse nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already decided. "Then I'm with you. Both of you." Outside, thunder rumbled again, a distant warning of another approaching storm. But inside the Hart Ranch house, something stronger than fear was taking root, a determination to stand together against whatever schemes Blackwood and Pierce had set in motion. None of them could have predicted how the coming confrontation would reshape their lives, or the terrible choice Owen would soon face between honoring an old debt and protecting a new love. As evening shadows lengthened across the valley, the pieces were being positioned for a final reckoning, one that would determine not just the fate of the Hart Ranch, but the very soul of Redemption Creek itself. The Blackwood mansion stood on a hill overlooking Redemption Creek, its stone walls and high windows a stark contrast to the modest wooden structures of the town below. Built 2 years earlier using imported materials and skilled craftsmen from Denver, it was a declaration of wealth and power, Colonel William Blackwood's monument to his own ambition. As Owen's wagon approached the circular drive, he felt Olivia tense beside him. She wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her copper hair and made her eyes shine like emeralds. Martha had altered it skillfully to accommodate her pregnancy, which at 6 months was impossible to disguise but carried with quiet dignity. "It's not too late to turn back," Owen said quietly, noting the armed men positioned discreetly around the property. Olivia's chin lifted. "Yes, it is." Her gloved hand found his briefly. "But I'm grateful you're here." They had agreed Owen would accompany her as escort, a decision Blackwood had accepted with suspicious ease. Jesse had been left at the ranch with Frank and two trusted hands, instructions clear. If they didn't return by midnight, the boy was to be taken to the Peterson farm for safekeeping. A liveried servant met them at the entrance, leading them through a cavernous foyer decorated with hunting trophies and expensive furnishings that spoke more of ostentation than taste. The drawing room beyond buzzed with the conversation of 24 guests, the wealthiest residents of Redemption Creek, bankers from Denver and railroad investors, all dressed in finery that seemed absurdly out of place in the frontier territory. Colonel Blackwood spotted them immediately, breaking away from a conversation to approach with the confident stride of a man accustomed to command. At 50, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored evening wear, his silver-streaked beard trimmed to precision. "Captain Hart, Miss Montgomery," he greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How delightful that you could join us." "You left little choice in the matter," Owen replied quietly, his tone civil despite the steel beneath. Blackwood chuckled as if Owen had made a charming joke. "Business and pleasure often intertwine, Captain. Speaking of which," he turned to Olivia, his gaze openly assessing her condition. "There's someone quite eager to see you, my dear." He gestured across the room where a distinguished man with silver hair and aristocratic features stood in conversation with a younger gentleman. Even without the introduction, Owen would have recognized Senator Edward Pierce from their encounters during the war, the same commanding presence, the same calculating eyes that missed nothing. Beside him stood a man in his late 20s, handsome in a soft, privileged way, his resemblance to the senator unmistakable. Jonathan Pierce had filled out since his lieutenant days, his uniform replaced by expensive civilian attire. But Owen recognized the weak chin and nervous hands of the young officer who'd served under him briefly before Gettysburg. "Shall we?" Blackwood prompted, offering his arm to Olivia with exaggerated courtesy. Olivia ignored it, keeping her hand firmly on Owen's arm as they crossed the room. Senator Pierce turned as they approached, his expression revealing nothing as his gaze swept over Olivia's pregnant form before settling on Owen. "Captain Hart," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "It's been many years." "Senator," Owen replied, matching his formal tone. "I wasn't aware you remembered a junior officer from Gettysburg." A thin smile crossed Pierce's face. "I make it a point to remember men who've saved my son's life, Captain, even when the circumstances were complicated." The reference to that bloody day when Owen had pulled Jonathan from beneath his fallen horse during a Confederate artillery barrage hung between them, laden with unspoken debts. "Miss Montgomery," Pierce continued, turning to Olivia, "you're looking well considering your situation." "No thanks to your son," Olivia replied, her Boston upbringing evident in the perfect balance of politeness and ice in her tone. Jonathan flushed, unable to meet her gaze. "Olivia, Miss Montgomery to you," she corrected sharply. "We're hardly on familiar terms anymore, Lieutenant Pierce." Blackwood watched this exchange with barely concealed satisfaction, like a man observing pieces moving precisely as planned on a chessboard. "Perhaps we should continue this reunion more privately," he suggested, Dinner won't be served for another half hour. He led them to his study, a masculine space dominated by a massive desk and walls lined with maps and land surveys. Owen noted one map in particular showing the proposed railroad route through Redemption Creek Valley, cutting directly across the Hart Ranch. "Please be seated," Blackwood invited, closing the door behind them. "Brandy, Senator Captain." "I prefer we get to the point, Colonel," Owen said flatly. "Why have you brought us here?" Blackwood smiled, pouring himself a generous brandy regardless. "Direct as always, Hart. Very well." He leaned against his desk, swirling the amber liquid. "Senator Pierce and I have a proposition that could benefit everyone in this room." "Everyone except Miss Montgomery, I suspect," Owen countered. "On the contrary," Pierce interjected smoothly, "my primary concern is for my grandchild." He turned to Olivia. "Whatever transpired between you and my son, that child carries Pierce blood. I'm prepared to ensure its future financially and socially." "How generous," Olivia replied coldly. "And what would this generosity cost me?" "Discretion," Pierce said simply. "The child would be raised by Jonathan and his new wife." "His what?" Olivia interrupted, genuine shock breaking through her composure. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. "Father arranged a match with the governor's daughter. The wedding is next month." "How convenient." Olivia's voice trembled with suppressed fury. "And where would I be while you raise my child as your own?" "San Francisco," Pierce replied. "I've arranged a teaching position at an exclusive academy there, along with a generous stipend. You would be well provided for, far from any unpleasantness." "You want me to give up my baby," Olivia stated flatly, "to pretend it never existed." "I want to protect my family's reputation and political future," Pierce corrected, "while ensuring you and the child are cared for appropriately." "And if I refuse," Pierce's expression hardened. "Be reasonable, Olivia. An unmarried mother has few prospects on the frontier. The child would face ostracism, poverty." "Not necessarily," Owen interrupted, his quiet voice cutting through Pierce's persuasion. "Not at the Hart Ranch." All eyes turned to him, Olivia's widening with surprise, Jonathan's narrowing with suspicion, Pierce's calculating as always. "Ah, and here we come to the crux of the matter," Blackwood said, setting down his brandy. "Captain Hart has developed quite an attachment to you, Miss Montgomery. One might even call it romantic." Owen kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. He had indeed grown to care deeply for Olivia over the past weeks, her courage, her intelligence, her unwavering dignity in the face of adversity. But he had said nothing, done nothing to act on these feelings, respecting her vulnerable position and the complexity of their situation. "My personal feelings are irrelevant," Owen stated. "What matters is that Miss Montgomery has found refuge at the Hart Ranch for herself and her child. A refuge I intend to maintain, regardless of Senator Pierce's plans or your financial pressure, Colonel." Blackwood exchanged a glance with Pierce before reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a folded document, placing it deliberately on the polished surface. "I anticipated your nobility, Captain, which is why I've prepared an alternative proposal." He pushed the document toward Owen. "The deed to the Hart Ranch free and clear in exchange for your testimony regarding certain events at Gettysburg." Owen didn't touch the paper, though he felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "What events would those be?" "The death of Lieutenant James Blackwood." The colonel replied, his voice suddenly stripped of its false civility. "My brother." The room fell silent. Even Jonathan, who had been fidgeting nervously, grew still. "That matter was investigated and closed 13 years ago," Owen said carefully. "Self-defense during a combat situation. A finding secured through Senator Pierce's influence," Blackwood countered. "But new evidence has emerged, evidence suggesting you executed my brother in cold blood after he surrendered his weapon." Owen's gaze shifted to Pierce, whose expression revealed nothing. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Blackwood smiled thinly. "3 former soldiers from your unit have signed affidavits stating otherwise. Men whose memories were refreshed by financial incentives." "Perjury," Owen stated flatly. "Perhaps, but sufficient to reopen the case and bring you to trial for murder." Blackwood nodded toward the document. "Unless you sign the ranch over to me voluntarily and leave the territory. Tonight." The trap was now clear. If Owen refused, he faced a trumped-up murder charge that could send him to prison or the gallows. If he agreed, he would lose the ranch and be forced to abandon Olivia to Pierce's schemes. And Miss Montgomery, Owen asked, though he already knew the answer, would naturally remain here to reconcile with her child's father and grandfather. Blackwood replied smoothly, her future secured as we originally proposed. Olivia rose from her chair, her face pale but determined. I'm not a piece of property to be bargained over, gentlemen. Nor is my child, she turned to Owen. And I won't allow you to sacrifice everything you've built on my account. Before Owen could respond, the study door opened abruptly. Sheriff Daniels stood in the doorway, his weathered face grim beneath his gray mustache. Forgive the interruption, he said, though his tone suggested no real apology. There's trouble in town, Colonel. Some of your men got into a shooting match with Jenkins and his hands at the saloon. 2 dead, several wounded. Blackwood's expression darkened. Handle it, Sheriff. I'm entertaining important guests. That's just it. Daniels continued, his gaze shifting significantly to Owen. One of the dead is Thomas Jenkins. His boy Robbie is raising hell, claiming it was a planned ambush. Got half the town riled up, talking about forming a vigilance committee. Owen's jaw tightened. Thomas Jenkins, the man whose son they'd rescued from Blackwood's mine less than a month ago. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. You'll need to excuse us, Owen said to Blackwood and Pierce, rising and offering his arm to Olivia. It seems Redemption Creek requires our attention. This discussion isn't finished, Hart. Blackwood warned, all pretense of civility gone. On the contrary, Owen replied evenly, I believe it is. As they followed Sheriff Daniels from the study, Owen felt Olivia's hand tighten on his arm. Outside, beyond the manicured grounds of Blackwood's mansion, they could see torches moving in the town below. Angry men gathering, voices raised in the night. Did Jenkins really confront Blackwood's men? Owen asked Daniels quietly as they waited for their wagon to be brought around. The sheriff shook his head slightly. Blackwood's foreman, Hodge, picked the fight, called Jenkins' boy a thief in front of the whole saloon, then drew when Thomas defended him. His gaze was knowing. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say, getting you alone up here while stirring trouble in town? Very, Owen agreed grimly. But why? The answer came as they rounded the side of the mansion toward the stables. 4 of Blackwood's men emerged from the shadows, guns drawn. That's far enough, Hart, Hodge called out, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. The colonel wants a private word with Miss Montgomery. Owen stepped protectively in front of Olivia, his hand moving toward his holster. Stand down, Hodge. Sheriff Daniels is right here. Sorry, Hart, Daniels interrupted, his voice suddenly cold as he drew his own weapon, training it on Owen. Colonel Blackwood's been appointed the new territorial judge. Pays better than sheriff. The betrayal hit Owen like a physical blow. Daniels had been Redemption Creek's law for 5 years, a man Owen had considered, if not a friend, at least an ally. You won't get away with this, Olivia said from behind Owen. Owen, her voice steady despite the fear he could sense in her rigid posture. Already have, ma'am, Daniels replied. Now you'll go back inside with these men nice and quiet. Captain Hart has an appointment at the jail until this business with Jenkins is sorted out. Owen calculated their chances. 4 gunmen plus Daniels, all armed and ready. His hand hovered near his revolver, knowing he might get one shot off before they cut him down. But that would leave Olivia unprotected at Blackwood and Pierce's mercy. If I go with you, he said carefully, what guarantee do I have that Miss Montgomery won't be harmed? You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Hodge sneered. On the contrary, came a new voice from the darkness. I believe he is. Frank Miller stepped into the light shotgun leveled at Daniels. Behind him emerged several more figures, Jenkins' ranch hands armed and grim-faced. Frank, Owen acknowledged, relief washing through him. Didn't expect to see you here. Jesse was worried, Frank replied simply. Boy's got good instincts. Rode to the Jenkins place himself when he heard about the shooting in town. Hodge's hand twitched toward his holster. You're outnumbered, old man. Count again, Frank suggested mildly. More men materialized from the shadows surrounding the mansion's grounds. Peterson and his hands, the Carter brothers, from the next valley. Even young Robbie Jenkins, his face tear-streaked, but determined to rifle steady in his hands. Appears the Vigilance Committee has already formed, Owen observed. Stand down, Daniels. This doesn't need to get bloody. For a tense moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then Daniels slowly lowered his weapon, a flicker of shame crossing his weathered features. Colonel won't forget this, he warned. Neither will Redemption Creek, Owen replied. Turning to Olivia, he added softly, let's go home. They rode in silence through the gathering darkness, surrounded by a protective escort of ranchers and cowboys. News of Thomas Jenkins' death and Blackwood's involvement had spread quickly, uniting the independent-minded settlers of the valley against a common threat. But Owen knew the victory was temporary. Blackwood still held the banknote on the ranch, still had men on his payroll, still possessed connections that reached to Denver and beyond. At the ranch, they found Jesse waiting anxiously on the porch, his young face lighting with relief as they rode into view. You're back, he called, running to meet them. Then, noticing the grim faces of the men, he asked, what happened? Is it true about Mr. Jenkins? Owen nodded, dismounting and helping Olivia down from the wagon. It's true, Jesse. Blackwood's men killed him. The boy's expression hardened with a maturity beyond his 12 years. Then we fight back, right, Uncle Owen? It's not that simple, Owen began, but Jesse cut him off. It is simple. Blackwood's evil, just like those Confederates you fought. You always told me a man stands up for what's right, no matter the con. Owen exchanged a glance with Olivia, seeing his own weariness reflected in her eyes. How could he explain to the boy that standing up for what was right sometimes meant impossible choices, sacrifices that cut to the bone? Let's get inside, he said instead. We need to talk, all of us. In the kitchen, Martha had prepared coffee and food for the gathered men. As they clustered around the large table, Owen outlined what had transpired at Blackwood's mansion. The threats, the accusations about Gettysburg, the document demanding the ranch. He won't stop, Peterson observed grimly. Not now that blood's been spilled. He can't take on every rancher in the valley, Carter argued. He won't have to, Owen replied. He'll pick us off one by one, legally or otherwise. The railroad's backing him. They want this route, and they're willing to pay whatever it costs. So what do we do? Asked Robbie Jenkins, his young voice cracking with grief and anger. My pa's dead because of him. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Frank, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. During the war, he said quietly, Captain Hart led a unit behind enemy lines to free slaves from a plantation in Virginia. 21 of us escaped that night, including me. Half his men died in the attempt. He looked around the table, his gaze settling on each face in turn. He did it because it was right, not because it was easy or safe. Owen felt the weight of memory, the smell of pine for us that night, the whispered commands, the terrible cost of that mission. And yet, even knowing the price, he would make the same choice again. We need evidence, he said finally. Proof of Blackwood's methods, his plans for the railroad, his connection to Jenkins's murder. Something that would stand up in a territorial court. The documents Robbie saw at the mine, Peterson suggested, the maps and letters. Owen nodded slowly. Those would do it, but they'll be heavily guarded now. I could get in, Robbie offered immediately. I know the layout. They wouldn't expect me to come back. No, Owen said firmly. I won't risk another boy's life. I'm not a boy, Robbie protested, anger flashing in his eyes. My father's dead. I have the right. Your father would want you alive. Olivia interrupted gently, speaking for the first time since they'd returned. Vengeance won't bring him back, Robbie. The young man subsided, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. Owen recognized it all too well, the burning need to act, to make someone pay for an unbearable loss. He'd felt it himself after his brother's death, after Sarah and their infant son died in childbirth. That path led only to more pain. I'll go, Owen decided. Frank knows the mine as well as anyone. We'll retrieve the documents tonight while Blackwood is still dealing with the aftermath in town. And if you're caught, Olivia asked, her voice carefully controlled. If these trumped-up charges about Gettysburg lead to your arrest or worse, Owen met her steadily. Then you'll have the ranch, Olivia. I've already spoken to Judge Wilson in Denver about papers naming you and Jesse as my heirs in the event anything happens to me. The revelation silenced the room. Jesse looked up sharply, his eyes wide with surprise. Olivia's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, where Pierce's grandchild grew alongside a future Owen had just offered them both. I won't have you martyring yourself, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Not for me, not for this land, not for some misguided sense of honor. It's not martyrdom, Owen corrected gently. It's a promise. To Jesse, to you, to the child you carry. A promise that some things are worth fighting for even when the odds seem impossible. In that moment, with the eyes of every man in the room upon them, something shifted between Owen and Olivia, an acknowledgement of feelings that had grown quietly but irrevocably over the weeks since she'd arrived at the Hart Ranch. Without words, without touch, a bond formed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Then I'm coming with you," she stated, her tone brooking no argument. "Olivia, I was engaged to a banker's son, remember?" she interrupted. "I know how to read financial documents, land deeds, contracts. If we're searching for evidence of Blackwood's schemes, I'll recognize it faster than anyone." Owen started to object, then saw the determination in her eyes, the same fierce courage that had brought her west alone, pregnant and abandoned, rather than accept Pierce's demeaning terms. This was not a woman to be sheltered or protected against her will. "All right," he conceded, "but at the first sign of trouble, you return to the ranch with Frank. That's non-negotiable." She nodded, accepting the compromise. Around the table, the men exchanged glances, some approving, others uncertain. None questioned Owen's authority to make this decision or Olivia's right to participate. In the crucible of crisis, traditional boundaries had melted away, leaving only the essential question: who would stand against the tyranny and at what cost? As the ranchers departed to prepare for the night's mission, Jesse approached Owen in the hallway, his young face solemn in the lamplight. "You made Miss Montgomery your heir," he said, not quite a question. "Along with you," Owen confirmed. "I should have discussed it with you first, I'm sorry." Jesse considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Does this mean she's staying for good?" "If she chooses to," Owen replied carefully. "Would that bother you?" The boy was silent for a long moment, seemingly wrestling with complex emotions. "I didn't like her at first," he admitted finally. "Thought she was trying to replace Aunt Sarah in your life, but—" He hesitated, then continued with the brutal honesty of youth. "You smile more since she came. You don't just stare at the mountains at night anymore." Owen felt a tightness in his throat at the boy's perception. He hadn't realized Jesse had noticed those solitary vigils on the porch when memories of Sarah and their lost son had threatened to overwhelm him. "Miss Montgomery isn't trying to replace anyone, Jesse. She's just finding her own place here, as we all are." Jesse nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I'll help Frank ready the horses." He turned to go, then paused. "Uncle Owen, be careful tonight. I can't lose you too." As the boy disappeared down the hallway, Owen felt the full weight of responsibility pressing down upon him, not just for the ranch and the gathering resistance against Blackwood, but for the makeshift family that had formed beneath his roof. Jesse orphaned but resilient, Olivia carrying new life despite abandonment and betrayal, and himself a man who had believed his heart permanently sealed by grief, now finding it unexpectedly open again. Whatever evidence they found tonight at the Miller mine, whatever confrontation awaited with Blackwood and Pierce, one truth had become undeniable. The Hart Ranch was no longer simply land and buildings to be defended. It had become, against all odds, a home worth fighting for. As Owen strapped on his revolver and checked the Winchester rifle that had accompanied him since Gettysburg, he caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. The man who looked back was not the broken, grieving widower who had retreated to this remote valley 3 years ago, nor was he the hard-eyed captain who had led men into battle during the war. He was something new, a man with purpose beyond survival, with connections that gave meaning to the scars he carried. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon once more, as if the very elements sensed the confrontation to come. But for the first time in years, Owen Hart faced the approaching darkness without the hollow ache of solitude. Whatever happened at the Miller mine tonight would determine not just the fate of the Hart Ranch, but the future of Redemption Creek itself and the fragile hope of redemption that had taken root in his own heart. The Miller mine loomed against the night sky, its abandoned structures transformed into shadowy sentinels by the moonlight filtering through scudding clouds. From their vantage point on a ridge overlooking the compound, Owen could make out 2 guards patrolling the perimeter, another stationed by the main building. Far fewer men than he had expected. "Something's not right," he murmured to Frank, who lay beside him in the scrub brush. "Blackwood would have tripled security after what happened in town." Frank nodded, his weathered face grim in the moonlight. "Unless he wanted us to come." "A trap," Owen concluded, the realization settling cold in his stomach. Behind them, Olivia shifted uncomfortably, her pregnancy making the prone position difficult to maintain. She had insisted on coming despite Owen's concerns, arguing that her knowledge of financial documents would be crucial. Now dressed in men's clothing borrowed from Martha's son loose trousers and a shirt that partially disguised her condition, she looked both vulnerable and determined. "If it's a trap," she whispered, "we should leave. Find another way." Owen weighed their options. The documents they sought could provide legal leverage against Blackwood, proof of his schemes to manipulate land prices, perhaps even evidence connecting him to Jenkins' murder. Without them, they had only accusations and suspicions that would never stand in court. "We proceed," he decided finally, but cautiously. "Frank, circle around to the eastern approach. If you see anything suspicious, fire a warning shot and retreat to the rendezvous point." Frank nodded, melting into the darkness with the silent efficiency of a man who had once guided escaping slaves through Confederate territory. "Stay close to me," Owen instructed Olivia as they began their descent toward the mine. "If I say run, you run, no arguments." Her hand found his in the darkness, squeezing briefly. "Be careful, Owen. Jesse needs you." The unspoken addition, "I need you," hung in the air between them, too fragile yet to be acknowledged aloud. They approached from the western side using a dry creek bed for cover. The moon disappeared behind clouds, providing additional concealment as they reached the edge of the compound. Owen counted silently as the guard made his rounds, timing the man's movements. When the sentry passed, they darted forward, reaching the shadow of the main building without detection. A side door stood ajar, another warning sign that made Owen's combat instincts prickle. But they were committed now. He drew his revolver, easing the door open with his boot. The interior was dark, illuminated only by a single oil lamp on a desk at the far end of the room. No one in sight. "The office should be through there," Olivia whispered, pointing to a door behind the desk. "That's where Robbie saw the maps." They moved silently across the room, Owen scanning for tripwires or other traps. At the desk, Olivia quickly rifled through papers while Owen kept watch. "Nothing useful here," she murmured, frustration evident in her voice. "Routine mining reports supply orders." "Try the office," Owen suggested, his unease growing with each passing minute. The silence was too complete, the entrance too easy. The office door opened to their touch, revealing a small room dominated by a massive safe against the back wall. Map cabinets lined one side, a filing cabinet the other. "The safe would be ideal," Olivia said, "but I don't suppose you are skilled at cracking them." Despite the tension, Owen felt a brief smile touch his lips. "Not among my talents, I'm afraid. Let's try the cabinets first." They worked quickly, Olivia checking the filing cabinet while Owen examined the maps. Minutes ticked by, the silence broken only by the rustling of paper and their measured breathing. "Owen," Olivia called softly, excitement in her voice. "Look at this." And she held up a folder containing land deeds, dozens of them all, for properties along the proposed railroad road. But what caught Owen's attention was the list of names scrawled on the inside cover: ranchers and homesteaders who had refused to sell, with the Hart Ranch at the top marked with a bold X. "This is it," he said, flipping through the documents. "Proof that Blackwoods had been systematically acquiring land along a predetermined route. And look," he pointed to a telegraph from the railroad company dated 6 months earlier. "They agreed to pay him 10 times market value for securing the right-of-way." "There's more," Olivia added, producing another folder. "Financial records showing payments to Sheriff Daniels, Judge Wilson in Denver, even territorial officials. He's been buying influence throughout the region." Owen tucked the documents into his jacket. "This should be enough to—" A sound from outside interrupted him. Horses approaching at speed, men's voices calling orders. The trap was springing shut. "We need to go," Owen said urgently, pulling Olivia toward the door. "Now." But as they emerged from the office, a figure stepped from the shadows. Colonel William Blackwood, a revolver leveled steadily at Owen's chest. "Captain Hart," he greeted them with cold satisfaction. So predictable, always charging in to right perceived wrongs regardless of the consequences. His gaze shifted to Olivia. "And Miss Montgomery, how disappointing to find you engaged in criminal trespassing and theft. What would Senator Pierce think? He'd probably recognize your handwriting on that list of people to be eliminated." Olivia retorted, her voice steady despite the fear Owen could sense in her rigid posture. Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. "Spirited as always. I can see why the good captain has developed such attachment to you." He gestured with his revolver. "The documents, if you please." "They're evidence of your crimes," Owen replied, making no move to surrender the papers. "Bribery, corruption, conspiracy enough, to see you imprisoned. In whose court? Blackwood asked mildly. The judge I've paid, the territorial governor, who owes his election to my financial support. He shook his head. You've lived too long with romantic notions of justice, Hart. In the real world, power and money determine what's just. More footsteps sounded outside Blackwood's men surrounding the building. Owen calculated their chances. The documents were secure in his jacket, but escape seemed increasingly unlikely. Where was Frank? Had he been captured, or was he still free to provide the warning shot they now desperately needed? As if in answer, a rifle crack echoed from the eastern ridge, followed by shouts of alarm from Blackwood's men. Frank had spotted the ambush and was providing a diversion. Owen moved instantly, driving his shoulder into Blackwood's chest, sending the older man staggering backward. The colonel's revolver discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Owen knocked it aside, following with a left hook that connected solidly with Blackwood's jaw. "Run!" Owen shouted to Olivia, pushing her toward the side door. "Get to the horses!" She hesitated only a moment before fleeing her pregnancy, making her movements awkward but determined. Owen turned back to find Blackwood recovering, blood trickling from his split lip, eyes burning with cold fury. "You've signed your death warrant, Hart," he snarled, reaching for a second revolver in his belt. Owen lunged forward, grappling with the colonel for control of the weapon. Despite his age, Blackwood was strong, his military training evident in the efficiency of his movements. They crashed into the desk, sending the oil lamp shattering to the floor. Flames leapt instantly to life, feeding on spilled kerosene and dry wooden planks. "The whole place will burn," Owen warned, still struggling for the revolver. "Then we'll burn together," Blackwood replied, a fanatical gleam in his eyes. "A fitting end for both of us." The fire spread with terrifying speed, fueled by decades of coal dust and dry timber. Smoke billowed through the room, making breathing difficult as the two men continued their desperate struggle. Outside, gunfire erupted as Frank engaged Blackwood's men, providing cover for Olivia's escape. With a final surge of strength, Owen twisted the revolver from Blackwood's grip, sending it spinning across the floor. He delivered another punch that sent the colonel stumbling backward into the burning office. Without hesitation, Owen turned and ran for the exit, choking on smoke, the heat of flames scorching his back. Outside, chaos reigned. Frank had positioned himself on a rocky outcrop, his rifle keeping Blackwood's men pinned down as they sought cover. Olivia had reached the horses, mounting awkwardly but successfully. She looked back anxiously, relief flooding her face as Owen emerged from the burning building. "Go!" he shouted, running toward her. "Head for the ranch!" A bullet kicked up dirt at his feet. One of Blackwood's men had spotted him. Owen returned fire, emptying his revolver in the man's direction to keep him under cover as he reached his own horse. Swinging into the saddle, he wheeled the animal around, firing again, to signal Frank to disengage and follow. They thundered away from the compound, the night split by gunfire and illuminated by the growing inferno of the mine buildings. Owen pushed his horse to its limits, keeping pace with Olivia while checking constantly for pursuit. Frank brought up the rear, his rifle ready for any followers. They had ridden perhaps a mile when Olivia suddenly gasped, clutching her belly. "What is it?" Owen called, alarmed. "The baby," she managed through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong." Cold fear gripped Owen's heart. They were miles from the ranch, from any medical help, with Blackwood's men potentially in pursuit. Olivia's face had gone pale in the moonlight, her breathing labored. "Can you stay mounted?" he asked urgently. She nodded, though her expression betrayed her pain. "I have to." Frank caught up to them, taking in the situation with a glance. "There's an old line shack about half a mile east," he said. "Used it during roundups years back. Might still have supplies." "Lead the way," Owen instructed, moving his horse alongside Olivia's to support her if necessary. The line shack proved to be a humble one-room structure with a sagging roof and weathered walls, but it was shelter. Inside, they found a crude bed, a small stove, and basic supplies left by cowboys during the last cattle drive. Frank quickly got a fire going while Owen helped Olivia to the bed. "It's too early," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "The baby's not due for months yet." Owen took her hand, projecting a calmness he didn't feel. "It might just be the exertion, the stress. Try to rest." Frank appeared at his side. "I'll keep watch outside. If Blackwood's men tracked us." Owen nodded his understanding. "Be careful, Frank." Left alone with Olivia, Owen felt a helplessness that reminded him too painfully of Sarah's difficult labor, the blood, the fear, the desperate prayers that had gone unanswered. He couldn't lose Olivia the same way, couldn't face that particular hell again. "Talk to me," Olivia requested, her voice strained but determined. "Distract me." Owen searched for a suitable topic. "Tell me about Boston," he suggested finally. "About your life there." A faint smile touched her lips. "Proper, structured, suffocating. Everything decided for you, whom to marry, how to behave, what to think." Her hand tightened on his as another pain gripped her. "My father was a respected professor. My mother the perfect faculty wife. I was to follow the same path, marry well, host dinner parties for important colleagues." "And then Jonathan Pierce," Owen prompted gently. "And then Jonathan." She agreed, her expression turning wistful. "Handsome, charming, from the right family. He courted me properly, spoke of our future together." I believed him. Her gaze met Owen's. "I was a fool." "No," Owen disagreed. "You trusted someone who promised to honor that trust. The failure was his, not yours." Another contraction seized her stronger than before. Olivia bit back a cry, her face contorting with pain. When it passed, she lay back exhausted. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly. "For taking me in that day, for standing against Blackwood, for—" She hesitated. "For showing me what a real man's promise means." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither had fully acknowledged until now. Owen reached out, brushing a strand of copper hair from her forehead with gentle fingers. "I made a promise to myself after Sarah died," he admitted quietly, "that I would never allow myself to care so deeply again, never risk that kind of loss." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "You made keeping that promise impossible, Olivia Montgomery." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Owen, The moment was shattered by Frank's urgent call from outside. "Riders coming. At least 6 of them." Owen rose immediately, checking his revolver and the Winchester rifle. "Stay here," he told Olivia. "Whatever happens, keep hidden." Outside, he joined Frank behind a low stone wall that bordered the shack. In the distance, lanterns bobbed in the darkness, Blackwood's men searching methodically across the open ground. "They're tracking us," Frank observed grimly. "Found our trail from the mine." Owen assessed their situation with the practiced eye of a combat veteran. The line shack stood exposed on 3 sides with only a small copse of trees providing cover to the north. 2 men against 6 with Olivia injured and vulnerable inside. "We need to lead them away from here," he decided. "I'll circle around, create a false trail, heading west. You stay with Olivia." Frank shook his head. "Too risky splitting up. Besides, my old bones can't run as fast as yours if it comes to that. I'll create the diversion. You protect Miss Montgomery." Before Owen could protest, Frank continued in a tone that brooked no argument. "I owe you my life, Captain. Let me pay that debt my way." The 2 men held each other's gaze for a long moment. Brothers forged not by blood, but by shared struggle, by promises kept through the worst of times. Finally, Owen nodded, extending his hand. "God go with you, Frank Miller." The older man gripped his hand firmly. "And with you, Captain Hart." With that, Frank slipped away into the darkness, moving with the silent efficiency that had once made him an invaluable scout during the war. Minutes later, Owen heard a shout from the western ridge. Frank had allowed himself to be glimpsed by Blackwood's men. The lanterns changed direction, moving away from the line shack in pursuit. Owen returned inside to find Olivia attempting to rise from the bed, her face pale but determined. "We need to move," she insisted, "while they're distracted." "You're in no condition." "I won't be the reason you or Frank die tonight," she interrupted fiercely. "The pains have subsided. I can ride." Owen recognized the stubborn set of her jaw, knew arguing would be futile. Still, he hesitated. Moving her could worsen her condition, but remaining here meant eventual discovery once Blackwood's men realized Frank's diversion. "All right," he conceded finally. "But slowly, and you tell me immediately if the pains return." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved cautiously outside. The night had grown colder, a biting wind sweeping down from the mountains. In the distance, shots echoed Frank, engaging their pursuers, drawing them further away. They mounted their horses, Owen leading Olivia's by the reins to maintain a slow, careful pace. The moon emerged briefly from behind clouds, illuminating the landscape in silver light. To the south lay Redemption Creek and the Hart Ranch safety, but also the most obvious destination Blackwood would anticipate. To the east, the Peterson homestead, where Jesse waited with the other ranchers. "We head north," Owen decided, turning their horses toward the foothills. "There's an old trapper's cabin in the high country. We can shelter there until it's safe to return." They rode in silence through the night, each lost in their own thoughts. Owen's mind churned with worry for Frank, fighting a rearguard action against overwhelming odds, for Jesse waiting anxiously at the Peterson place, for Olivia and her unborn child enduring hardship no expectant mother should face. The documents they'd seized from Blackwood's office remained secure inside Owen's jacket, evidence that could potentially bring down the colonel's corrupt empire. But at what cost? Even if they survived the night, even if they made it back to Redemption Creek with proof of Blackwood's crimes, who would enforce justice? The sheriff was bought, the territorial judge in Blackwood's pocket, the governor possibly complicit. As if sensing his troubled thoughts, Olivia spoke. "We'll find a way, Owen. The truth has power of its own." He glanced at her, marveling at her strength. "You sound very certain for someone who's seen how easily truth can be buried by men like Pierce and Blackwood." "I believe in justice," she replied simply. "Not the kind bought in courtrooms or enforced by corrupt officials, but the deeper justice that eventually finds all men." She met his gaze steadily. "And I believe in you." The declaration, so straightforward and yet so profound, touched something deep within Owen, a part of himself he had thought long dead, buried alongside Sarah and their infant son. The capacity to hope, to believe that tomorrow might hold something better than today. A rifle shot shattered the moment the bullet whining past Owen's head, close enough that he felt its passage. He reacted instantly, wheeling his horse around to shield Olivia, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. On the ridge behind them stood a lone horseman, rifle raised for another shot. Even in the darkness, Owen recognized the silhouette, Colonel William Blackwood, somehow having survived the fire at the mine, now personally leading the hunt. "Get to cover," Owen shouted to Olivia, pointing toward a cluster of boulders 30 yards ahead. "Go." She hesitated only a moment before spurring her horse forward, while Owen fired 3 rapid shots at Blackwood to force him to seek cover. The colonel returned fire, his aim precise despite the distance and darkness. One bullet struck Owen's horse in the shoulder, causing the animal to rear in pain and nearly unseat its rider. Owen managed to stay mounted, urging the wounded horse toward the boulders where Olivia had taken shelter. More shots rang out from the ridge as Blackwood was joined by his men returning from their pursuit of Frank. The implication sent a chill through Owen's heart. Frank had either been captured or killed. Reaching the boulders, Owen dismounted, helping Olivia from her horse. "Stay down," he instructed, positioning her behind the largest rock. "They have the high ground in numbers." "But not the moral advantage," she replied, her voice steady despite the dire circumstances. Owen checked his ammunition, 4 rounds remaining in his revolver, perhaps 20 in the Winchester. Nowhere near enough if Blackwood's men decided to rush their position. "Owen," Olivia said quietly, taking his hand, "if we don't make it through this, I want you to know." "We'll make it," he interrupted firmly. "I promised Jesse I'd return, and I intend to keep that promise." His fingers intertwined with hers. "All of my promises." The simple declaration held within it everything he couldn't yet say aloud, that she had become essential to him, that the future he now envisioned included her and her child alongside Jesse, that the Hart Ranch was no longer merely a place but a home they might build together. "A man's promise," Olivia murmured, understanding perfectly. Voices called from the ridge, Blackwood's men spreading out, preparing to surround their position. Owen positioned himself to defend their meager shelter, knowing the odds were overwhelming. Yet a strange calm settled over him. Whatever came, he would face it without regret. He had found something worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. As the first of Blackwood's men appeared, moving cautiously through the scrub brush toward their position, Owen raised the Winchester to his shoulder. His finger tightened on the trigger, ready to sell their lives as dearly as possible. Then from the north came an unexpected sound, hoofbeats, many of them approaching rapidly. For one terrible moment, Owen feared Blackwood had summoned reinforcements. But the riders who appeared on the northern ridge weren't Blackwood's men. Even in the darkness, Owen recognized the lead figure, Jesse, mounted on Owen's second-best stallion, flanked by Peterson Carter and at least a dozen other ranchers. "Uncle Owen," the boy's voice carried clearly through the night. "We brought help." Behind him rode an even more unexpected figure, Jonathan Pierce, accompanied by several men Owen didn't recognize. And beside Pierce, looking distinctly uncomfortable on horseback, but determined nonetheless, sat Senator Edward Pierce himself. The tide had turned, but the night's dangers were far from over. Blackwood, cornered and desperate, was perhaps at his most dangerous. As the opposing forces converged on the boulder field, Owen pulled Olivia closer, shielding her with his body. "Whatever happens," he whispered against her hair, "stay down and stay alive. For the baby. For Jessie." His voice dropped even lower. "For me." She clutched his arm, her green eyes luminous in the darkness. "For us," she corrected softly. "All of us." The confrontation that would determine the fate of Redemption Creek and their future was about to begin. In that moment, with bullets flying and lives hanging in the balance, Owen Hart made one final silent promise. If they survived this night, he would build a life worthy of the trust this remarkable woman had placed in him, a legacy that would honor all they had endured together. As Senator Pierce's voice rang out, calling for Blackwood to surrender, Owen steeled himself for whatever might come. The darkest hour was upon them, but beyond it lay the possibility of dawn, and with it, the chance to begin anew. "Blackwood, this is Senator Edward Pierce. Throw down your weapons and surrender immediately." The senator's authoritative voice carried across the boulder field, momentarily freezing the confrontation. Owen peered cautiously over their stone shelter, assessing the changed situation. To the north stood Pierce, his son, and the ranchers who had accompanied Jessie. To the south, Colonel Blackwood and his remaining men, perhaps 8 in total, held the high ground, but now found themselves caught between opposing forces. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Blackwood's cold laugh broke the silence. "Senator Pierce," he called back, his voice dripping with disdain. "How unexpected. Come to rescue your son's discarded mistress and your bastard grandchild." Owen felt Olivia stiffen beside him, her hand unconsciously moving to protect her belly. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "I've come to see justice done," Pierce replied, his tone revealing nothing of his true intentions. "The territorial governor is aware of your actions, Blackwood. Your schemes end tonight." Another laugh, this one edged with genuine amusement. "My schemes? We've been partners in this venture from the beginning, Senator. Or have you forgotten our agreement concerning the railroad committee?" A murmur ran through the ranchers at this revelation. Owen exchanged a glance with Olivia, whose expression confirmed his suspicions. Pierce was as deeply implicated in the land grab as Blackwood himself. "Circumstances have changed," Pierce responded coldly. "Surrender now, and you'll face fair treatment under the law." "Fair treatment," Blackwood's voice hardened, "like the fair treatment you arranged for me after Gettysburg, when you buried the inquiry that would have revealed your son's cowardice and Hart's true actions that day." Owen tensed, the old wound reopened. The truth of Gettysburg had been his burden alone for 13 years. The knowledge that Lieutenant Jonathan Pierce had ordered his men to fire on civilians trying to flee the battle, that Owen's intervention had led to the confrontation with James Blackwood, that the official account had been sanitized to protect Pierce's political future. Olivia's hand found his in the darkness, her touch anchoring him to the present moment. Whatever had happened at Gettysburg, whatever debts and betrayals lay in their shared past, they had a future to secure for themselves, for Jessie, for her unborn child. "Uncle Owen," Jesse's voice called out closer now. The boy had separated from the main group, working his way toward their position. "Are you all right?" "Stay back, Jesse," Owen shouted, alarmed at the boy's exposure. "Take cover." Too late. A shot rang out, one of Blackwood's men firing at the movement. The bullet struck a rock near Jesse, sending fragments spraying. The boy ducked momentarily, protected by a shallow depression. Owen reacted instinctively, rising from cover to provide suppressing fire with the Winchester. His shots forced Blackwood's men to dive for protection, giving Jesse precious seconds to scramble toward the safety of the boulders. "Go!" Owen commanded Olivia, pointing to a larger rock formation 20 yards to their right. "Take Jesse and get to better cover." She hesitated, unwilling to leave him exposed, but the need to protect Jesse overrode her concerns. As Owen continued firing, she darted out, reaching the boy and pulling him toward the larger rocks. They had nearly made it when Blackwood himself appeared on a ridge above, rifle aimed directly at them. "Olivia!" Owen shouted in warning, swinging his Winchester toward the colonel. 3 shots rang out simultaneously, Owen's, Blackwood's, and a third from an unexpected direction. Blackwood jerked backward, dropping his rifle as a red stain blossomed on his shoulder. He staggered, then fell from the ridge, landing heavily on the rocky ground below. Owen spun toward the source of the third shot. Jonathan Pierce stood 30 yards away, his revolver still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Their eyes met across the distance. Two men who had once served together, now connected by a woman neither had expected to change their lives. "Hart?" Jonathan called, lowering his weapon slightly. "Truce, we need to talk." The shooting had momentarily ceased, both sides stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Owen hesitated, then nodded curtly, moving to join Olivia and Jesse at their shelter while keeping his rifle ready. "Are you hit?" he asked them urgently, his eyes scanning for injuries. "We're fine," Olivia assured him, though her face was pale in the moonlight. "Jesse saved me." The boy looked up at Owen, his young face showing both fear and determination. "I couldn't let them hurt her, Uncle Owen. Not Miss Olivia or the baby." Owen placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. "You did well, Jesse, but that was a foolish risk." "Like you're one to talk," Olivia murmured, the ghost of a smile touching her lips, despite their perilous situation. Jonathan approached cautiously, hands visible to show he meant no threat. Behind him, his father and the ranchers held their positions, while Blackwood's men attended to their fallen leader. "Hart," Jonathan greeted him warily. "Miss Montgomery." His gaze lingered briefly on Olivia's pregnant form before returning to Owen. "We don't have much time. My father's intervention is complicated, meaning he's as guilty as Blackwood," Owen concluded bluntly. Jonathan didn't deny it. "Politics makes for strange bedfellows. The railroad committee as chairmanship would have secured his congressional seat." He glanced back at the senator, who remained mounted at a distance. "But certain lines shouldn't be crossed, even in politics." "Like murder," Olivia suggested coldly, "or abandoning a woman carrying your child." Jonathan flinched at her directness. "I deserve that," he admitted. "I was a coward in more ways than one." He turned to Owen. "But I'm trying to make it right now. The documents you took from the mine, they're crucial. My father's prepared to testify against Blackwood in exchange for immunity." "Of course he is," Owen said with thinly veiled disgust. "Always looking after his own interests." "It's more than that," Jonathan insisted. "He's also prepared to acknowledge Olivia's child publicly as his grandchild, to provide financial support without demanding custody or control." Olivia's breath caught. The offer was unexpected, a legitimate acknowledgement that would protect her child from the stigma of illegitimacy without requiring her to surrender her rights as a mother. "Why the sudden change of heart?" Owen asked skeptically. Jonathan's gaze dropped. "Because I showed him what real integrity looks like." He looked up, meeting Owen's eyes directly. "I told him everything about Gettysburg. The truth this time, that I gave the order to fire on civilians, that you intervened, that James Blackwood died trying to carry out my command." His voice dropped lower. "That you took the blame to protect a frightened lieutenant who happened to be a senator's son." The admission hung in the air between them, the truth Owen had carried silently for 13 years, the burden of another man's cowardice. He felt Olivia's questioning gaze, but kept his focus on Jonathan. "And your father accepted this revelation with grace and understanding, I suppose?" The skepticism in Owen's tone was unmistakable. "Hardly," Jonathan replied with a bitter smile. "But he recognized the political reality. If Blackwood goes down for corruption and murder, my father can position himself as the crusading senator who exposed the scheme, sacrificing a tainted ally for the greater good. If the truth about Gettysburg emerges simultaneously," he shrugged, "better to control the narrative, offer redemption through generosity toward Miss Montgomery and her child." "Always the politician," Owen observed grimly. Jonathan agreed. "But in this case, his self-interest aligns with justice, and with what's best for Olivia and the child." Before Owen could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of Blackwood's men. The colonel had regained consciousness and was shouting orders, his voice hoarse with pain and rage. Gunfire erupted once more, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. "Get down!" Owen commanded, pushing Jesse and Olivia deeper into the shelter of the boulders. Jonathan crouched beside them, drawing his revolver again. "They're desperate now," Jonathan observed. "Blackwood knows his only chance is to eliminate all witnesses." Owen nodded grimly. "And the documents?" He patted his jacket where the evidence remained secure. "We need to get Olivia and Jesse to safety." The ranchers can provide covering fire, Jonathan suggested, if we circle around to the east. His planning was interrupted by a pained gasp from Olivia. She clutched her belly face, contorting in agony. The baby, she managed through gritted teeth. The contractions are back stronger than before. Cold fear gripped Owen's heart. They were miles from town, from any medical help, caught in a firefight with no easy escape. Olivia's face had gone pale, sweat beading on her forehead, despite the night's chill. How far apart? He asked urgently. Minutes, she replied, breathing heavily as the contractions subsided. Too close. Something's wrong, Owen. Jonathan's expression shifted from tactical assessment to genuine concern. She needs a doctor. There's no time, Owen replied, making a swift decision. Jonathan, you and Jesse get to the ranchers. Tell them to push Blackwood's men back. Give us an escape route to the north. And you? I'm staying with Olivia. We'll follow when she's able to move. Jonathan hesitated, clearly torn between duty and the desire to remain with the woman who carried his child. Finally, he nodded. I'll come back with help. As he and Jesse prepared to make their dash across the open ground, Owen turned to Olivia, taking her hands in his. Hold on, he urged her. Just a little longer. Her green eyes met his, fear battling with determination. If something happens to me, promise you'll take care of the baby. Don't let Pierce or Jonathan take my child. Nothing's going to happen to you. Owen insisted, though the memory of Sarah's death in childbirth haunted his words. But I promise your child will always have a home at the Hart Ranch, no matter what. The sincerity in his voice seemed to calm her. She nodded, then tensed as another contraction seized her. Owen held her through it, his mind racing. They needed more than an escape route. They needed a miracle. As the contraction eased, Olivia gasped, Water! My water broke! The implications were clear and terrifying. The baby was coming months too early in the midst of a gunfight miles from medical help. Owen had assisted at enough cattle births to understand the basics, but a premature human birth was far beyond his experience. Jonathan, he called urgently, change of plans. The baby's coming now. We need cover, substantial cover, and any medical supplies you can find. Jonathan's face paled, but he nodded, disappearing with Jesse toward the rancher's position. The gunfire intensified momentarily, then shifted as the ranchers began a coordinated assault on Blackwood's position, drawing fire away from Owen and Olivia. In the relative quiet that followed, Owen helped Olivia drum into the most sheltered position possible, using his coat to provide some comfort against the hard ground. Her breathing had become labored, her grip on his hand almost painful as contractions came in increasingly rapid succession. I'm scared, Owen, she admitted, her voice small in the darkness. I know, he replied, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. But you're the strongest woman I've ever known, Olivia Montgomery. You crossed half a continent alone to protect your child. You stood up to Pierce and Blackwood. You can do this. She managed a wan smile. Your faith in me is somewhat overwhelming. Not faith, he corrected gently. Knowledge. I've seen what you are capable of. Another contraction hit, more intense than before. Olivia bit back a scream, her body arching with the pain. When it passed, she lay back exhausted but determined. If I don't survive this, you will, Owen interrupted firmly. If I don't, she insisted, tell my child about me. Not just the proper Boston lady who made a mistake, but the woman who found her strength in Redemption Creek. The woman who, she hesitated, then continued softly, the woman who fell in love with a man who kept his promises. The declaration, so simple and yet so profound, struck Owen to his core. Olivia, I know it's too soon. She continued, her words tumbling out between labored breaths. I know there's Sarah and your grief and the complications with Jonathan and Pierce, but I need you to know in case. Owen silenced her with the gentle press of his lips against hers, their first kiss tender, despite the desperate circumstances surrounding them. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers in the dim light. Not too soon, he whispered, and you're going to have plenty of time to tell me again, because you're going to survive this. Both of you. Movement nearby signaled Jonathan's return. He carried a canteen of water and what appeared to be a medical kit. The ranchers are pushing Blackwood's men back, he reported, setting down his supplies. Senator Pierce has sent a rider to town for the doctor, but he won't arrive in time, Owen finished. We do this ourselves. He turned to Jonathan. Have you ever assisted with a birth? The younger man looked terrified at the prospect. No, but he stopped reaching into his pocket. I brought this. Thought it might help. He produced a small silver flask, offering it to Olivia. She accepted it gratefully, taking a small sip of the whiskey within. Her grimace suggested it was potent. Not exactly medical supplies, Owen observed dryly. It's what we have, Jonathan replied, a hint of his old defensiveness emerging. Olivia's next contraction prevented further discussion. Owen checked her progress as discreetly as possible, alarmed to discover the birth was advancing rapidly. The baby's coming, he announced, forcing calm into his voice. Olivia, when the next contraction hits, you'll need to push. What followed was a blur of pain effort and desperate hope. Olivia fought with every ounce of her strength, her cries mingling with the distant sounds of gunfire as the battle for Redemption Creek continued around them. Jonathan proved surprisingly steady, following Owen's instructions without question, his face set in determined concentration. Just as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, a new sound joined the cacophony of battle, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Tiny but perfect, Olivia's daughter emerged into Owen's waiting hands, her face scrunched in protest at the harshness of the world beyond her mother's womb. A girl, Owen announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the infant in his shirt. Small but strong. He placed the child in Olivia's arms, watching as her exhausted face transformed with a radiance that outshone the approaching dawn. Hello, little one, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Welcome to the world. Jonathan stood awkwardly to one side, his expression a complex mixture of wonder, regret, and resignation as he beheld his daughter for the first time. She's beautiful, he said simply, like her mother. Olivia looked up at him, her gaze softening slightly. Would you like to hold her? Surprise flashed across Jonathan's face, followed by trepidation. I don't know how. Support her head, Owen instructed, helping transfer the tiny bundle to Jonathan's arms. Like that. The sight of the battle-hardened lieutenant cradling his newborn daughter with terrified reverence brought an unexpected lump to Owen's throat. Whatever Jonathan's failures as a man, this moment of connection with his child offered a glimpse of redemption. The moment was interrupted by approaching hoofbeats, Senator Pierce accompanied by several ranchers, including young Jesse. The senator dismounted awkwardly, his aristocratic bearing at odds with the rugged surroundings. His gaze moved from the infant in his son's arms to Olivia's exhausted form, and finally to Owen, who stood protectively beside them. Is the child... Well, Pierce asked, his tone carefully neutral. Your granddaughter is small but healthy, Senator, Owen replied. No thanks to your schemes with Blackwood. Pierce's expression tightened, but he made no attempt to deny the accusation. Instead, he turned to Olivia. Miss Montgomery, I owe you an apology. My concern for political expedience led me to treat you and your child, my grandchild, in a manner unbecoming a gentleman. He straightened his shoulders. I am prepared to acknowledge her publicly and provide for her future without conditions. Olivia regarded him steadily, neither accepting nor rejecting his offer. And Blackwood. The evidence of your collaboration. Colonel Blackwood has been apprehended, Pierce reported. His wounds are not life-threatening, unfortunately. As for our business arrangements, I will testify to his coercion of territorial officials and his involvement in Jenkins's murder. He cleared his throat. In exchange for certain considerations regarding my own role. Of course, Owen said dryly. Politics as usual. Pierce's gaze hardened. Don't be naive, Captain Hart. The railroad is coming to Redemption Creek with or without Blackwood, with or without my involvement. Progress cannot be stopped. His expression softened slightly as he looked at his newborn granddaughter. But perhaps it can be guided more humanely. Jesse, who had been hovering uncertainly nearby, finally approached. His young face registered wonder at the sight of the infant. Is that Miss Olivia's baby? Yes, Jesse, Owen confirmed, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Would you like to meet her? The boy nodded solemnly. Jonathan carefully transferred the bundle to Owen, who in turn helped Jesse hold the newborn. The boy's expression of awe and immediate protectiveness brought a smile to Olivia's tired face. What's her name? Jesse asked. Olivia considered for a moment, then answered with quiet certainty. Eleanor Grace Montgomery. Her gaze met Owen's. Eleanor was Owen's mother's name. The choice honoring Owen's family rather than Pierce's was not lost on anyone present. Senator Pierce's mouth tightened briefly before he nodded in acceptance. Jonathan looked momentarily hurt, then resigned, understanding the statement Olivia was making about her child's future. "A fine name," Owen said softly, emotion making his voice rough, "for a very special little girl." As if in response, Eleanor opened her eyes for the first time, brilliant green like her mother's, and gazed solemnly at the strange new world around her. A world of conflict and compromise, of broken promises, and new beginnings of redemption found in the most unexpected places. The aftermath of what became known as the Battle of Miller's Ridge transformed Redemption Creek in ways few could have predicted. Colonel William Blackwood stood trial for Jenkins' murder and corruption, his empire dismantled piece by piece as former allies scrambled to save themselves by testifying against him. Senator Pierce emerged relatively unscathed, positioning himself as the crusader who had exposed Blackwood's schemes, a narrative accepted in Washington if viewed more skeptically in Colorado territory. The railroad still came to Redemption Creek, but on terms negotiated by a coalition of ranchers led by Owen Hart. The route preserved the integrity of the Hart Ranch and other family homesteads while still providing the access to water and resources the railroad required. Progress, as Senator Pierce had observed, could not be stopped, but it could be shaped by men of principle. Jonathan Pierce returned to Boston after the trial, his brief time with his daughter having awakened something long dormant in his character. He resigned his position in his father's political organization, instead pursuing a law degree with the stated intention of representing those without power or influence. Whether this transformation would endure remained to be seen, but the man who left Redemption Creek carried himself differently than the one who had arrived, straighter, steadier, with the beginnings of integrity taking root. Frank Miller had survived Blackwood's pursuit, though his injuries kept him bedridden for weeks. He recovered slowly under Martha's attentive care, eventually resuming his duties as foreman of the Hart Ranch with increased authority and with the respect of every rancher in the valley for his courage that night. And at the Hart Ranch itself, life assumed a new rhythm centered around Eleanor's needs and growth. Though born prematurely, she thrived under the combined care of Olivia, Owen, Jesse, and the entire ranch community. Her first smile, first word, first steps were celebrated as milestones, not just for her family, but for Redemption Creek itself, living proof that new beginnings were possible, even from the most challenging circumstances. On a crisp autumn day, 6 months after Eleanor's dramatic arrival, Owen and Olivia stood together on the porch of the Hart Ranch, watching Jesse teach the ranch hands' children how to fly a kite in the meadow below. Eleanor slept peacefully in Olivia's arms, her copper hair so like her mother's, catching the late afternoon sunlight. Senator Pierce's latest letter arrived today. Olivia mentioned breaking the comfortable silence between them. "He's increased Eleanor's trust fund again." Owen nodded, unsurprised. In the months since the confrontation, Pierce had demonstrated his commitment to his granddaughter through generous financial provisions, though he had respected Olivia's wishes regarding custody and control. Buying his way into heaven, most likely, Owen observed, though, without the bitterness that might once have accompanied such a statement, or at least into history's good graces. "Perhaps," Olivia agreed, "but it will ensure Eleanor has opportunities, education, security." "She would have had those regardless," Owen said quietly. "Everything I have, everything I am, has been hers since the moment she was born." Olivia turned to him, her green eyes searching his face. "You've never asked me about that night, about what I said when I thought I might die." Owen's gaze remained steady. "I didn't need to. You've shown me every day since then." She smiled, the expression transforming her face with a beauty that still caught his breath. "As have you." He took her free hand in his thumb, tracing across her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar and precious to them both. "I've been thinking about something Jesse said recently, about how a ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's people, a family working together." He paused, gathering his courage. "I'd like to make our family official, Olivia, if you'll have me." Her eyes widened slightly, though the possibility of marriage had hung unspoken between them for months. "Owen Hart, is that a proposal?" "Not a very elegant one," he admitted with a rueful smile, "but sincere. I love you, Olivia Montgomery. You and Eleanor are more. I want to build a life with you, to keep the promises I've made and make new ones for the years ahead." Tears glistened in her eyes, catching the golden light. Even with all the complications, Eleanor's paternity, Pierce's involvement, the talk in town, especially with all of that, Owen replied firmly, Life isn't neat or simple, but some things are worth fighting for, worth building despite the challenges. His hand tightened on hers. You taught me that. Eleanor stirred in Olivia's arms, blinking sleepily up at them both before settling back into contented dreams. Olivia looked down at her daughter, then back at Owen, her decision written clearly in her expression before she spoke the words. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it, the complications, the challenges, the promises. Her voice softened. The love. As their lips met in a kiss that sealed this new promise between them, Jesse's voice called from the meadow below, triumphant at having launched his kite successfully into the clear Colorado sky. They separated, laughing at his enthusiasm, their foreheads touching briefly before they turned to watch the boy's achievement. Should we tell him now? Olivia wondered. Tonight, Owen decided. At supper, though I suspect he's been expecting this announcement for some time. Indeed, Jesse had made his approval increasingly obvious, referring to Olivia as our family and Eleanor as my sister, despite the lack of formal ties. The makeshift family created by circumstance had become real through choice, through daily acts of care and commitment. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the Hart Ranch, Owen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the chaos of Gettysburg to the desperate confrontation at Miller's Ridge, from grief and solitude to unexpected love and renewal. The scars remained, they always would, but they had been transformed into something else, reminders not just of past pain, but of resilience, of survival, of the capacity to begin again. Redemption Creek had lived up to its name after all. That evening, as they gathered around the table, Owen, Olivia, Jesse, Eleanor, Frank, and Martha, the announcement of their engagement was met with smiles and congratulations that held no surprise, only joy and approval. As Martha served her special apple pie in celebration, Jesse raised his glass of milk in an impromptu toast. To family, the boy declared, with the solemn dignity of his 12 years. And to keeping promises. To keeping promises, the adults echoed, their glasses meeting in the center of the table. Later, after the dishes were cleared and Eleanor tucked into her cradle, Owen and Olivia stood once more on the porch, the vast canvas of stars stretching overhead. His arm encircled her waist, drawing her close against the evening chill. What are you thinking? She asked, sensing his contemplative mood. Owen considered the question, his gaze taking in the ranch that had been his refuge, and now would be their shared legacy land that would pass to Jesse and Eleanor, that would sustain generations yet unborn. I'm thinking about something my father used to say, he replied finally. War can take a lot from a man, but it can't take his ability to keep a promise. He meant that when everything else is stripped away, possession's position, pride, a man's word remains his own. His choice to honor it or break it defines him more than any battle won or lost. Olivia nodded, understanding the weight these words carried for a man who had survived Gettysburg, who had carried others' burdens alongside his own, who had rebuilt his life from the ashes of loss. A man's promise, she murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. And a woman's courage, Owen added softly, pressing a kiss to her copper hair. Together they might just be enough to face whatever comes next. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the night sky, a fleeting moment of beauty in the vast darkness, a reminder that even in the wilderness, there were lights to guide the way home. End of Part 5, story complete.